Every step I take, yeah, the world says hello. Got a heart so full, it's like a melody playing. Every little thing just goes my way. And maybe it's fate or a dream come true, but luck's got a way of sticking like glue. Nah, it just finds me like a wave riding high on the right sea. Pocket full of dreams, yeah, I cash them in. Life's a jackpot, I just spin and spin. Got my people, got my peace, got my rhythm too. Dancing through the highs, singing through the blues. Even when the rain falls, I just twirl. Cause I know, I'm a lucky girl. Cause I know I'm a lucky girl. Turns into gold. Stars align, they shine for me. Guess I'm right where I'm meant to be.
Hello, welcome back to the Pixel Tea. I'm also streaming on my other channel called The Mad Chatter. If anybody's over there, hello and welcome. Live and learn. I appreciate that. Keep up the highest vibration. You know, that's what this stream is about. Healing echoes, embracing strength across generations. That's the name of my stream today. If someone could let me know in the chat that you can hear me okay. I am in my shop and the air conditioner is a little loud, so if anyone could let me know if it's too loud, I'd appreciate it. But anyway, I showed earlier, this stream is for my loved ones. Shout out to La Familia. And for any of my loved ones in my family that's tuned in while the stream is live or in the future, I love you. I love you so much. And let me give you a little bit of a background on myself. Everybody has trauma in their life, right? Within the bloodlines, they speak about having generational trauma. And I'll be honest, I think that there is truth to that. Because I know with my family, trauma has been evident throughout the stories that are told. on both sides of my family, my mother and my father's side. Trauma involves an emotional response to a terrifying event that can disrupt a person's sense of safety and create feelings of helplessness. This can manifest in various ways, including shock, fear, anger, sadness, difficulty concentrating, and a sense of helplessness. The psychological impact of trauma can be significant and may lead to long-term reactions such as PTSD if the initial trauma response is insufficient. Psychological trauma or mental health trauma is a person's emotional response to a distressing event that overwhelms their ability to process it emotionally. It can be caused by events like accidents, natural disasters, war, violence, or threats to the life of the individual or their loved ones. Trauma can be categorized as acute or chronic. Acute trauma is a short-term response to a perceived or real threat. This subject matter is, I'm not going to be able to speak about it in one stream. And if anyone was over at the Mad Chatter recently, I've decided to start doing open live panels. And another YouTuber by the name of What's Up Cynthia, her and I are in the talks of doing streams together at least once a week. So I figured that I need to start practicing more. And I know that I mentioned that on our last stream together, we were brainstorming ideas, and that I had mentioned that I wanted to do a stream about this topic. I have some information that I found on the psychology of trauma, and also thought that I would speak about some information about narcissism. And even within myself, each decade we all learn something new. And when I was a child, there was so much chaos. There was so much dysfunction, and I had decided as a little girl that I didn't want to continue to perpetuate the same behavior that I saw the grown-ups around me. And unfortunately, those grown-ups were my influence. And those traits were passed on to me. And in different relationships in my life, whether it be personal or professional, these dysfunctional traits followed me. And it has affected me in ways that I am still trying to battle now. And I'm trying to heal them. And I'm trying to align my mind, my body, and my spirit, but particularly my body. I had no idea how much of a struggle this would be for myself. So I thought I'd share these thoughts with you guys, because nobody's life is perfect. And nobody's trauma, no one should be judging the level of another person's trauma. I've learned that, and I've learned it the hard way. Let's see here. Carl Jung believed that the path to wholeness requires us to confront our deepest pain, not just escape it. If you ever felt like an emotional sponge burdened by the world's pain, this information is for you. We're going to look into the psychology of emotional burnout, spiritual exhaustion, and what it really means to integrate sensitivity without disappearing inside of it. Why empaths burn out, how emotional absorption fractures identity, the shadow side of compassion, the myth of Chiron and the wounded healer. Carl Jung speaks about archetypes. The loneliness of the mystic archetype, the path to individuation and inner alchemy. You don't burn out from doing too much. You burn out from feeling too much and pretending it's nothing. There are people who carry the room before they even sit down. They absorb tension like breath. They walk into silence and feel its sorrow. They become emotional tuning forks for everyone else's pain, vibrating with sadness that has no words, with stress that hasn't been named, with grief that no one else can feel, but that they cannot seem to escape. Not because they want to, because they don't know how not to. Some people are born without filters. Their skin is intact, but their soul is wide open. They don't just empathize, they merge. They don't just witness suffering, they house it. And the world unaware calls them kind, calls them gifted, calls them strong. Carl Jung once wrote, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But what if the self you must accept has never known how to close the door? What if it absorbs everything like oxygen and drowns silently, slowly, without anyone noticing? This is the curse of caring too deeply. It begins as a gift, a superpower, a way to connect, but over time, connection without protection becomes erosion. You're praised for being the one who understands. You're admired for being calm in the storm, but no one ever asks what it costs you to hold that calm. The truth is, the pain of others doesn't leave when they do. It lingers, it accumulates, it builds in your muscles, in your sleep, in the silence you crave, because noise now feels like too much. So you withdraw, not out of apathy, but overload. Phone calls become heavy. Eye contact feels intrusive. Conversations feel like obligation. And in that quiet retreat, you start to wonder, is there something wrong with me for feeling this much? Jung would say, no. He would say this is not the end of your path, it's the beginning. Because this isn't just sensitivity, it's a confrontation with the unconscious, with what Jung calls the collective reservoir of human experience, the place where the archetype, like the wounded healer and the mystic, live. These aren't just metaphors, they are psychic patterns activated in those who carry too much, too early, too deeply. When the conscious ego, the sense of I is not strong enough to hold these archetypes, it begins to collapse under the pressure. But the pain isn't proof you're broken. It's proof something ancient has been triggered inside you. You are not too sensitive. You are tuned, but tuning without boundaries becomes torment. You turn into a sponge for sorrow, a translator for trauma, a shelter for stories that were never meant to live in your body. The question isn't why do I feel this much? The question is how do I carry this much without losing myself in it? This is not sentimentality, this is soul work. Because what you're experiencing isn't random overwhelm, it's emotional absorption. What psychology now calls emotional contagion, a mirror neuron response where your nervous system becomes what is witnessed before your thoughts can process it. Your body already holds it and won't let it go until you name it, until you face it. Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain, but pain is not the enemy. Unconsciousness is, and when your empathy becomes unconscious, it becomes a trap. But when it becomes conscious, it becomes a key. And if the pain is the knock at the door, then the door itself is the path home, not just to healing, to the wholeness to yourself, to live with open empathy in a world trained to look away is to walk as an open wound amongst closed doors. You wake up already full of emotion that isn't yours, of guilt you never earned, of sorrow that doesn't belong to your story, but has somehow moved into your bones. It doesn't matter if you were alone yesterday. You carry it anyway. You always have. And at first, it's subtle. You pass someone on the street and feel a pain in your chest, your heart tension in someone's voice, and absorb it like it's your responsibility. A friend shares something painful and long after they've moved on at it, lives inside you. This isn't empathy, it's erosion. Carl Jung warned of this. He described what happens when the ego, the organizing center of consciousness, is overwhelmed by unconscious material. When you can't tell the difference between your own feeling and what you've absorbed. Salutes. How you doing, Red? Thanks for stopping by. Thank you for always giving me a place to go to, Red, and work this stuff out. Just want to tell you, thank you so much. Lev, it's so good to see you. I listened in on your stream earlier. It was really great. Hi, Calix. How you doing? We're just chilling today, guys, and just sharing some thoughts with you. Thanks. Appreciate that, Red. So back to what we were reading here. The boundaries of the self begin to blur. You stop knowing where you end. You feel tired, but it's not you're tired. You feel anxious, but there's no event. You feel guilt, but there's no cause, and yet it feels real. This confusion of ownership is not poetic, it's dangerous. Modern psychology calls this emotional contagion. When your body mirrors someone else's emotions so completely that you internalize them as your own. For some, it's momentary. For others, it becomes a way of being. Sit, you were like raised to be good, to be helpful, to be quiet, to attune yourself to others' needs before your own. Or before your own were even spoken. It says, there was a 9-year-old girl sitting at the kitchen table translating her mother's mood into silence. No words were spoken, but she knew what to do. Be small, be good, be invisible, and carry what no one else would. She grew up fluent in the unspoken. She grew up confusing empathy with identity, and that confusion never left at her. That's what happens. You become the interpreter of others' moods, the stabilizer of tension, the regulator of emotional weather systems that never were yours to balance. You feel responsible, you call it love. How you doing, Coppertone? I'm honored that you're here, sir. You feel responsible, you call it love, but deep down you are disappearing, and still the world calls you generous. But generosity without boundary is not virtue, it's self-erasure. Jung spoke of the shadow, the unconscious container of everything. We disown our anger, our boundaries, our needs, but also our vitality, our strength, our voice. And when we disown too much for too long, the shadow returns, not to punish, but to restore. The collapse you're feeling, that fog, that numbness, it's not failure, it's your shadow arriving to say you're no longer allowed to vanish in service of others. You're no longer allowed to hold what's not yours. This is not just burnout. This is boundary between self and soul buckling under pressure. And now you're being invited to rebuild it, to recognize that you do not exist to absorb. You exist to witness, to care, to feel, but not to disappear. Because your presence was never meant to be a container for everything broken around you. It was meant to be a home, and it's time to return. There comes a moment when care turns into collapse, when your light no longer warms it. Scorches when empathy becomes exhaustion and the cost of compassion is your own disappearance. You've lived it. You said yes when your body whispered no. You stayed calm when your spirit was screaming. You showed up for everyone until no one noticed you hadn't shown up. That you hadn't shown up for yourself. What began as presence became performance. What started as strength became sacrifice, and slowly, without meaning to you, began to vanish inside your own virtue. Carl Jung warned of what happens when we identify with an archetype so fully that we become its prisoner. The healer becomes not someone who heals, but someone who cannot stop healing, even when it's destroying them. This is what he called archetypal possession. When the psyche becomes swallowed by a role and the person inside it begins to disappear, you were taught to give, but never to receive. You were praised for holding it all together, but never told that your own unraveling mattered too. You became dependable, predictable, selfless. But Jung would ask, at what cost to the self? There was a woman capable, calm, always available after managing her partner's panic, her child's grief, and her colleague's breakdown. She sat on the bathroom floor, fully clothed, silent. And for the first time, she heard the question echo inside of her. What if no one ever plans to carry me? That moment wasn't collapse, it was the clarity. She didn't need saying. She needed remembering that her care was never meant to cost her voice. You didn't break. You gave until nothing was left. And the tragedy is that you were never supposed to give at all. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that darkness is not evil. It is unspoken. Needs suppressed, fatigue, unexpressed boundaries. It is the part of you that says enough. You were once the tuning fork for others' pain, but a life lived only in resonance leaves no room for your own melody. And that silence you feel inside, it's not emptiness, it's space, waiting for your music. The shadow isn't here to shame you, it's here to restore you, to return you to the one person you've abandoned the longest, yourself. This is the turning point of the wounded healer. The moment you stop offering your body as a container for everyone else's crisis visit, and begin asking yourself, what am I here to carry? And what am I finally allowed to put down? This is where the healer becomes the seeker, not of more pain to soothe, but of a deeper truth. But a deeper truth to live from compassion. It's not the act of vanishing, it is the art of being fully present. Without erasing the one who cares. And now you are the composer, not the echo. You are the fire keeper, not the flame. And your empathy is no longer a flood, it's a force. With form, with choice, with direction. If my stream glitched out, it's because my devices are all connected, my computer and my phone, and I got a call, so I apologize if it glitched there for a moment. Not all loneliness comes from isolation. Some comes from perception. You sit among people, laughter swelling around you like static, yet your mind drifts your body, present your soul somewhere else. You see what others don't. You feel what others avoid, and that you are both needed and never fully known. Carl Jung said, loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. And what happens when the most important things you feel live in silence, it's symbols, in dreams, you begin to speak. You begin to speak less, you shrink the depth of your insight to match a room that cannot hold it. You simplify your language to avoid sounding too much. You smile to keep things easy. You nod to keep things moving, but deep down you ache, not to be heard, but to be met. You've been there at the dinner table where everyone talks over each other, laughing on cue. You sit, still fork in hand, pretending to chew while your chest tightens with the feeling that has no name. It's not sadness, not fear, it's disconnection. Not from them, but from yourself. This is what Jung called moral loneliness, the space between what you know internally and what the world is willing to acknowledge. It's the loneliness of the mystic, the one who sees behind the veil, the one who knows that the sacred isn't always bright. It's often quiet, often strange, often alone, and yet the mystic longs to be known without translating, to be felt without having to explain. You are not broken, you are tuned. You hear the hum beneath the noise. You see the pattern beneath the chaos, and that makes you different, but not lost. There's a reason you retreat. It's not a flaw, it's instinct. To step away. It's not to abandon connection, it's to remember your center when the world pulls too hard. But solitude left unchecked becomes starvation. Even the mystic needs mirroring. Even the deep soul needs to be seen. And if no one else can offer that, yet then let it begin with you. The part of you that stopped speaking because no one could hear it speak. Speak to it. Sit with it. Bring it home. Jung taught that individuation, the journey to wholeness, doesn't begin in belonging, it begins in truth. And often the first truths we speak echo in empty rooms. Let them. You are not too much. You are simply fluent in language most have forgotten how to speak. Let others call it strange. Let them call it distant. You will know it for what it is, a return to the sacred interior, a tuning to the self, a wholeness that doesn't need permission to be real. You are not lost, you are ahead, and your loneliness, it is not a curse, it is an alignment, the still space before the new sound begins. Some wounds don't need to close, not because they are beyond repair, but because they're not asking to be fixed. They're asking to be witnessed. They are not malfunctions. They are portals, thresholds to a depth of being that cannot be accessed through comfort alone. Carl Jung understood this. He taught that suffering isn't always pathology. It is often process, a sacred unfolding, a psychic necessity. Then pain, made conscious, doesn't just wound, it initiates. It does not simplify damage, it transforms. Now, this is the wounded healer archetype, not a title, but a pattern, not a metaphor, but inherence. You don't choose. You don't choose it, you are shaped by it. You become the one others turn to, not because you've avoided pain, but because you've walked through it. Because something in your presence says, I've been to the edge. I've been to the edge too, and I didn't vanish. But here's the danger that one Jung warned about. When you over-identify with the archetype, it consumes you. You stop being a human being You become a function. You become the one who always knows what to say, always holds the space, always puts their needs second. You call it love, but often it's survival. The trained habit of disappearing inside usefulness. You carry others because no one carried you. You heal others because you were never given permission to pause and feel your own ache. And so healing becomes a performance. Compassion becomes a currency, and burnout becomes a badge of honor, worn silently beneath your smile. Psychologists call it compassion fatigue, but for the wounded healer, it's deeper. It's not just exhaustion, it's identity collapse. You forget what's yours. You forget that you're allowed to be held too. There was a woman steady, strong, irreplaceable. After a week of emotional labor for everyone around her, she stood in her kitchen at midnight holding a mug she hadn't sipped. And she said aloud, barely a whisper, "I don't want to be needed right now. I just want to be known." That wasn't a breakdown, that was a breakthrough. The moment the wound stopped being a burden and started becoming a boundary. Jung often spoke of Chiron, the wounded centaur, struck by a poisoned arrow. He could not heal, immortal. He carried the pain endlessly, but through that pain, he became the greatest healer of all. Not because he transcended suffering, because he listened to it, sat with it, let it remake him. He didn't escape the wound, he integrated it. That's what you're being called to do. Not to close the wound, but to honor it. To live with it, not in service of others' expectations, but in allegiance to your own soul. There is a difference between living with pain and living as pain. This is why I'm doing this stream. This is just so that you all know. This is why I'm doing this stream, because I've come to this awareness. The former is presence. The latter is identity. You are not your ache. You are the one who holds it. And holding it does not mean bleeding, not bleeding it onto others. It means tending it, listening, letting it speak in your own language, not theirs, but what you give to the world. Your insight, your compassion, your calm, it's sacred. But it's only sacred if it doesn't cost you yourself. You were once the background music in everyone else's story. Now it's time to step forward, not louder, but truer. To become the melody that doesn't drown in harmony. To be not just the healer, but the whole person behind the healing. Maybe the wound was never asking to be closed. Maybe it was asking to be honored so your soul could finally stop proving itself and just be whole. Being whole does not mean being unbroken. It means being integrated. It means that all parts of you have a place. Even the tired, the wounded ones, the ones you said yes to many times when they should have said no. This is not resignation, this is recognition. Yet, there you are, still the healers, but now you are also the one who rests, who refuses to carry what is not yours, who allows the wound to be what it is, not a weight, but a well, not a punishment, but a place you can return to, not for pain, but for depth. You are not here to save everyone. You are here to remember yourself, And I say now, the part of you that gave everything away is finally coming home. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when the burden shifts. It doesn't vanish, it doesn't dissolve, but something inside you begins to turn. The very thing that once made you feel weak, heavy, cursed, begins to reveal itself as sacred. That's the alchemy of sensitivity. Not a surrender, not a bypass, but a transformation rooted not in escape, but in integration. Carl Jung believed that the psyche's deepest drive is not towards happiness, but towards wholeness, not towards perfection, but towards individuation. The lifelong unfolding of the self through shadow and light, pain and meaning, fracture and union. And for those who feel deeply, this path is rarely straight because the world was not built to hold your sensitivity. It rewards the resilient, not the receptive. It praises detachment, not discernment. It confuses boundaries with barriers and silence with weakness. So you learn to doubt your gift. You wore armor over your intuition. You bent your spirit to be more digestible. You call it coping, but it was camouflage, and still something inside you never stopped listening. You were the tuning fork, the emotional barometer, I the mirror no one asked for, but everyone leaned on. But here's what no one told you. Mirrors deserve to be held to. Tuning forks need to rest, to stay calibrated, and souls attuned to the invisible require spaces that honor they carry. This is where the curse begins to unravel. Not by removing your sensitivity, but by reclaiming it. By understanding that your depth is not a problem. Your empathy is not a flaw. Your capacity to feel is not a disorder. You are not too much. You are not too much. You are what happens when the nervous system refuses to numb. When the heart stays open despite the ache. When the soul insists on depth and a shallow age, but now it's time to change the way you carry it. You are not here to absorb, you are here to translate, to witness, to hold. Not at your expense, but with your consent. Boundaries are not disconnection, they are the form that makes depth livable. They are the frame around the painting, not to hide it, but to protect its edges from bleeding into a world that does not understand brushstrokes. You can still care, you can still feel everything, but no longer have to lose yourself in the process, because this is what you knew, that the self is not found in serving the world endlessly. It is found in serving your inner wholeness, so that what you offer the world comes from truth, not depletion. You were never meant to carry it all. You were meant to feel, to discern, to offer your presence intentionally, not reflexivity. And now, after all the overgiving, after the earth is quiet, collapses after the years of self-erasure dressed up as compassion. Now you return not as the empath who absorbs, but as the alchemist who chooses, who lets the pain pass through, but not take root, who holds space without losing shape, who remains present and still whole because you have looked at your wound and stopped asking it to vanish. You have looked at your loneliness and stopped calling it failure. You have looked at your sensitivity and stopped asking it to become something else. Now you offer it differently, not to prove your worth, not to earn safety at all, because it is your truth. You've spent years dreaming of peace. Now you awaken into it, not as a condition, but as a posture. You rest without apology. You speak without shrinking. You feel without disappearing. And in doing so, you become what you were always meant to be. Not a vessel for everyone else's pain, but a force for a presence rooted in your own. The curse was never your death. It was the belief that you had to drown in it. Now you rise still, deep, still, soft, but sovereign. This isn't the end of your story. This is the first chapter you write, on your own terms, to fully felt awake. And finally, yours. So that's the first reading I have. Let's check out this chat. Your whole life has been preparing you for this very moment. And it is. This is what I think people experience, what they call an awakening, a spiritual awakening. Salutes to all of you gentlemen that are here in this chat. Honorable men that I've been able to have conversation with on panels and in chats, and I respect you guys. Okay, so let's check out this next one that I have for you. I've been having some loved ones that have really been going through it. And so I tell them that I have a YouTube channel and that I like to do research and that I like to participate in conversing with others online, because I do have a hard time finding people that are willing to have these types of conversations with me. And so I thought, I'm going to use this also as almost like a digital journal at times, so that my loved ones could go back and listen and maybe finally hear me for the first time. You feel me? Finally hear me. Dock on it. Push the wrong button. Break the narcissist's ego. 4 moves they can't handle. How to stop narcissistic abuse. Ways to set boundaries with toxic people. How to regain confidence after manipulation. Rebuilding self after emotional trauma. How to be mentally strong. Healing from narcissistic relationships. Tips for emotional resilience. These are some of the speaking points. It says here, When you engage with someone who exhibits narcissistic tendencies, you're not engaging with a person in the traditional sense. You're engaging with a structure, a psychological scaffolding that's been meticulously built over years, often rooted in profound insecurity, deep emotional wounds, and a fundamental terror of being truly seen. What you're facing is not openness but armor. It's not vulnerability but performance. And the performance is designed to protect something fragile, something they themselves can barely acknowledge, the emptiness that sits at the center of the inflated sense of self. Now, when people think of narcissists, they tend to imagine arrogance, manipulation, perhaps even cruelty, but what they fail to recognize is that all of this is reactive. It's not confidence. It's compensation. It's not strength. It's camouflage. When you set a boundary with a narcissist, what you're doing is far more than drawing a line. You're engaging in a fundamental restructuring of the psychological contract that they have been imposing on you, often for years. And that contract, by its very nature, is predicated not on mutual respect, but on exploitation, on domination, on your silence and their control. So when you say no, when you say this is the line, and you may not cross it, you aren't simply refusing a request, you're threatening the very framework of their existence. The illusion of superiority and control they've constructed like a fortress around a crumbling core. And make it no mistake, it is crumbling. Their identity in many cases is so brittle, so devoid of authentic self-understanding, that the smallest pushback can feel like annihilation. It's crucial to understand that the narcissist is not merely seeking validation, they are hunting for control. That control often takes the shape of emotional leverage, guilt, shame, triangulation, manipulation, tools that they wield with subtle and cunning boundaries. The boundaries interrupt that process. Boundaries say, I see what you're doing and I will not play along. And that's terrifying for them because if you see it, you're not under the spell anymore. You're not an object anymore. You're not a source of narcissistic supply. You are a sovereign individual, and nothing frightens a narcissist more than the loss of their ability to dehumanize you. Dehumanize you for the sake of their own fragile self-worth, but often follows the setting of a boundary as a kind of psychological warfare. They might escalate, they might retreat and sulk, they might lash out, or they might pretend to comply only to violate the boundary later. They're not strategizing consciously in most cases. It's instinctual, it's survival, because boundaries expose the fact that their identity is contingent on how others treat them, perceive them, and respond to them. They need compliance to feel real. They need affirmation to believe in their own value. A boundary is like holding up a mirror and showing them the emptiness behind their performance. But to hold a boundary, you have to confront your own discomfort with conflict. And this is where people falter, particularly those who are empathetic, agreeable, or conflict avoidant. They think setting a boundary is unkind, or aggressive, or somehow not nice. But that belief system is exactly what narcissists exploit. That's the vulnerability they latch onto. your desire to keep the peace, to avoid hurting others, because the mechanism by which they maintain power over you. So you have to ask yourself, what is the cost of your niceness? Is your peace worth sacrificing your dignity, your autonomy? Your soul setting a boundary requires you to face that internal resistance. You have to recognize the guilt, the anxiety, the fear that arises not because the boundary is wrong, but because you've been conditioned to equate self-protection with selfishness. You have to rewire that association. You have to teach yourself that saying no is not cruelty. It is clarity. It is integrity. It is responsibility. And if the narcissist responds with rage or manipulation or withdrawal, that's not proof that you're doing something wrong. That's confirmation that your boundary is working. Now, some people believe that setting boundaries will change the narcissist, that they will wake up, realize the harm that they've done, and suddenly become a different person. That's naive. Boundaries are not a tool to change others. They are a method for preserving yourself. They are the framework within which you can rediscover your own values, your own identity, your own agency. The narcissist may never change. They may always push away, test always, resent the limits you impose. That's irrelevant. What matters is your ability to hold the line, to stop being reactive, to stop being available for their chaos. And here's the thing. Every time you reinforce that boundary, you reinforce your own sense of self. Every time you choose not to engage in their drama, not to defend yourself against their distortions, not to collapse under the weight of their disapproval, you grow. You become someone who no longer needs their permission to exist. You become someone who doesn't negotiate their worth. You begin to see the manipulation not as some mysterious force, but as a desperate attempt to regain control over something they never truly owned. When you disengage emotionally from a narcissist, it's not merely an act of stepping back from a toxic relationship. It's an existential threat to the structure they've built to shield themselves from. The unbearable reality of their own inadequacy. Emotional disengagement at its core is a form of psychological non-operation. It's the refusal to participate in the drama they orchestrate. It's the act of taking your energy, your attention, your empathy, the very fuel that powers their false self, and walking away with it. And because narcissists rely so heavily on emotional entanglement for validation, control, and identity reinforcement, your disengagement functions as a type of psychological exile. Suddenly, the stage is empty, the audience is gone, and all that is left is the silence they've spent a lifetime avoiding. You see, narcissists don't just want attention, they need it. It's not a preference, it's not a craving, it's a dependency, a parasitic relationship with others' emotional responses. And when you remove that, when you stop reacting, stop pleading, stop defending, stop explaining, you become unreadable to them. And that's deeply unsettling, because if they can't predict you, they can't control you. If they can't get under your skin, They can't affirm their own sense of superiority. So when you emotionally disengage, you're not just denying them affection, you're denying them existence in a very psychological sense. Their identity is no longer mirrored in your reactions. Their sense of power no longer confirmed by your suffering. And it's precisely because of this dependency that they will fight against your detachment. They'll accuse you of being cold, unfeeling, disloyal. They'll try to provoke you, bait you into responding anything to get you to re-engage, because even negative attention is preferable to indifference. Indifference is death to the narcissistic ego. It's proof that they no longer have access to your inner world, and that loss of access is intolerable because they've built their self-concept on the illusion that they have mastery over the people around them, especially those once cared for them deeply. What makes emotional disengagement so powerful is that it undermines the entire dynamic of power and dependency. In the typical narcissistic relationship, the empath, the compassionate, emotionally attuned individual takes on the role of caretaker, the fixer, the emotional regulator. The narcissist learns into that. They exploit it. The narcissist leans into that. They exploit it. They learn how to push the right buttons, how to trigger guilt, obligation, pity, even hope. And for a long time, the empath stays hooked because they believe they're helping. Because they think love can heal what trauma created. But eventually the realization dawned, you're not helping someone evolve, you're enabling someone to avoid. You're not in a relationship, you're in a performance, one scripted entirely to maintain their illusion of control. And so when you finally disengage, not out of hatred, but out of clarity, you disrupt the script. You become unpredictable. You no longer provide the emotional highs and lows that feed the narcissistic cycle. And they panic because without your emotional availability, they're forced to confront the internal emptiness they've spent years denying. And that confrontation is terrifying, not because they're evil necessarily, but because they are deeply pathologically afraid of being seen for who they really are. Afraid of being irrelevant, afraid of being abandoned by the very people they worked so hard to dominate. This is where many people waver. They misinterpret the narcissistic panic as vulnerability. They see the desperation, the pleas, the sudden change in tone, and they think, maybe they've changed. But what you're seeing isn't transformation, it's withdrawal. It's the reaction of someone who's just lost access to their primary source of emotional narcotic. That's a powerful statement. Their primary source of emotional narcotic. They're not waking up to a new self. They're scrambling to restore the old dynamic. And if you go back, if you re-engage emotionally, you reinforce the pattern. You teach them that panic works. You teach them that the cycle can restart. But if you hold a line, if you remain disengaged, grounded, unreactive, you begin to reclaim a part of yourself that was surrendered long ago. Your energy returns, your clarity sharpens, your self-respect begins to rebuild. You stop asking, how can I make them see what I've done? And start asking, what made me believe I had to suffer to be loved? That's the turning point. That's the emergence of psychological independence. And while it may be invisible to others, to the narcissist, it's as if the very ground has shifted beneath them because the person they once controlled is no longer available. The narrative no longer works. The script has been torn up, and the silence left in your wake speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. When you stop explaining yourself to someone who has no interest in understanding you, you shift the entire foundation of the dynamic that once held you captive. And this isn't merely a matter of communication style or strategy. It's a profound psychological withdrawal from a power structure that was never built to be fair or reciprocal. Explaining yourself to a narcissist is not about clarity. It's not about being heard. And it's not about reaching mutual understanding. It's a trap disguised as dialogue. Every time you try to explain your pain, your reasoning, your decisions, or your boundaries, you're unknowingly participating in a ritual they crafted to maintain their superiority. And your subjugation at first glance, the compulsion to explain yourself appears reasonable. You want to be understood. You want to be fair. You taught that mature relationships are built on openness and communication, and for emotional, healthy individuals, that's true. But the narcissist isn't listening to understand. They're listening to find weakness. They're scanning for inconsistencies, for triggers, for any sign that they still have access to your emotional center. So when you explain yourself, you're not offering clarity, you're offering ammunition. You're feeding a narrative that they'll twist and use against you, sometimes immediately, sometimes later, but always with precision and intent. This cycle often begins with subtle invalidation. You express a concern or a boundary and they dismiss it. Call you sensitive, call you selfish, dramatic. You feel confused, perhaps guilty, so you try again. You reword it, soften, hoping that a better explanation will finally land, but it never does. Because the issue was never your words. It was the imbalance of the power embedded in the relationship. The narcissist has no interest in mutual understanding. They want dominance, cloaked in disclosure. And each time you explain, you reinforce their frame that you owe them justification, that your thoughts and feelings must pass through their approval filter to be valid. The tragedy here is that people with high capacity for empathy and self-reflection are often the ones caught in the web. Because you care, you want to be fair, you assume that if you can just find the right words, the truth will break through. But what you're dealing with is not a misunderstanding. It's a refusal. It's a refusal to acknowledge your humanity. And once you see that, and once that realization hits you at a visceral level, the compulsion to explain begins to die. You begin to understand that withholding explanation is not cruelty. It's protection. It's boundaries, not punishment. This withdrawal often triggers a severe reaction from the narcissist. They may escalate. They may accuse you of being cold, dismissive, immature. They may demand explanations, not because they want answers, but because they want the upper hand. And if that doesn't work, they might play the victim. Shift narrative. Suddenly you're the one who's distant, the one who doesn't care, the one who doesn't communicate. These are pressure tactics designed to pull you back into the cycle or justification. They work because they target your sense of guilt, your identity as a thoughtful, compassionate person. But compassion without boundaries is not virtue itself. Erasure, when you stop explaining your virtue itself, erasure. When you stop explaining yourself, you're not being unkind. You're acknowledging a truth that changes everything. Not everyone is entitled to your vulnerability. Not everyone deserves access to your inner life. And in a toxic dynamic, explanations are not bridges. They are chains. chains that bind you to people who see your openness as an opportunity to manipulate. So the choice to withhold explanation is not silence, it's resistance, it's strength. It's the recognition that your energy is finite and sacred, and not to be spent convincing someone of your worth when their behavior has already declared you worthless in their eyes. This shift also rewires your own internal dialogue, because if you've spent years explaining yourself to someone who won't listen, chances are you've also internalized that pattern. You explain yourself to yourself. You second guess your instinct. You rehearse conversations in your mind, imagining better ways you could have defended yourself. But once you stop explaining externally, you begin to challenge the need to explain internally. Let me say that again. But once you stop explaining externally, you begin to challenge the need to explain internally. And that's when true healing begins. That's when your self-trust starts to regenerate. That's when you start to feel safe within your own boundaries, no longer looking outward for permission to exist. It's important to note that the shift is rarely clean or easy. You may feel guilt. You may feel doubt. That's normal. You're breaking a pattern that was likely reinforced for years, maybe even from childhood. You were probably taught that love means explaining, defending, being understood, but love doesn't demand endless justification. Respect doesn't require defense, and truth doesn't need to be repeated for someone who refuses to hear it. When you stop explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding, you reclaim time, energy, and dignity that were never theirs to hold on to in the first place. And that reclamation, that quiet refusal, speaks more powerfully than any explanation ever could. When a narcissist begins to lose control, their perception of reality begins to crumble. Control, not simply a preference for them, is their lifetime. Their sense of their identity is built upon a foundation of domination, manipulation, and a carefully curated image that they must protect at all costs. When you remove yourself from their grip, what you're really doing is removing the mirror they use to validate their inflated sense of self. You were never seen as a separate, autonomous being. You are an extension of their ego. And when that extension is severed, they are left with something they cannot tolerate: a confrontation with their own emptiness. This unraveling doesn't happen immediately at first. They might mask the collapse. They may feel indifference, but on a show of strength, posturing as if your absence is irrelevant. But behind that mask, something entirely different is occurring. The absence of control triggers a deep panic, but it's not the kind of panic that is easy to identify. It doesn't manifest as honest emotion. It mutates into a projection, rage, grandiosity, or frantic search for a new supply. They are not seeking connection. They are seeking another mirror. One that will reflect back to them the illusion that they are important, dominant, superior. But what they often find, especially if you're someone who gave you deeply and sincerely, is that no substitute provides the same fuel, and that void becomes unbearable. The psychological architecture of a narcissist is constructed around denial. They deny their own inadequacies. their own vulnerabilities, their own emotional dependency. They bury shame so deep that even a hint of it threatens to destabilize their entire framework. When you leave, when you stop feeding the illusion, they're forced to face the very things they've spent a lifetime avoiding. But they can't face it directly. Instead, they externalize it, they blame, they demonize, they rewrite the narrative to make it themselves the victim and you the aggressor, because to accept that you left due to mistreatment, that you finally drew a line after enduring cycles of emotional manipulation, would mean accepting fault, and fault leads to shame, and shame to them is annihilation. This is why their world begins to spiral. The collapse is not just about losing you, it's about the entire facade starting to crack. Their strategies become more desperate. They might try to re-engage with you with kindness, apologies, false promises, not because they've changed, but because they need the dynamic restored. And if that fails, they shift tactics, smear campaigns, lies, treatments, lies, anything to regain semblance of control over its through destruction. Their self-worth is so diminished with their ability to control others that losing that power feels like death, but it's death they can't grieve properly, because grief would require acknowledgement of loss, and acknowledgement would require self-awareness. It's tempting to view their collapse as karmic justice. And on some level it is, but what's more important than their collapse is what represents it. Represents the truth that your withdrawal of energy has consequences. That their emotional labor you provided was not invisible. That the love, the tolerance, the forgiveness you extended was not weakness, it was a gift. The gift they never deserved and ultimately squandered. And once that gift is withdrawn, there's no replacing it. Because what you offered was not performative, not transactional. It was rooted in real empathy, real commitment. And that kind of energy cannot be manufactured or mimicked. Their collapse is not just an emotional response, it's existential, because without someone to validate their false self, they have to face their real one. And for many narcissists, their real self is an unformed, wounded core buried beneath years of ego projection mechanisms. That's why they disintegrate. That's why they lash out. That's why they chase new people only to repeat the cycle over and over, because they're not evolving. They're not healing. They're fleeing. They're running from the very parts of themselves that need the most attention. And every failed attempt to replace what they lost only reinforces the depth of that wound. Your absence becomes a mirror, but not in the kind they want. It reflects back their failure, their inability to maintain connection without control, their inability to love without domination. And while they may never admit it out loud, their behavior reveals everything. The chaos, the volatility, the desperation, these are not the response of someone who has moved on. These are the symptoms of a collapse. And though they may continue to posture, to project an image of strength and difference, it is only a matter of time before that image shatters under the weight of its own contradiction, because a persona built on illusion cannot withstand reality forever. Whew. So you see why I felt like I needed to share these things, because like I said earlier in the stream, I have some loved ones that are really going through it right now in their relationships. And my love and my energy and my attention is authentic. And when I read this information and these articles out to you, I myself have gone through these stages. So when you hear me reading it with the passion that I do, it's because I'm also speaking to myself. I'm not perfect, and I make mistakes. But I am at a place in my life where I have an awareness that I do not want this generational trauma empowering me anymore. No more. I am healing my vessel, I am healing my mind, and I am realigning my spirit. I understand that Carl Jung was also controversial, but what I read earlier really resonated with me, and it touched me in a way that I wanted to share it with all of you. And I'm going to share another one because I'm on a roll. Okay, I'm on a roll. The burden of intelligence and the pain of seeing too much. If you ever thought, why do I feel so alone in a world full of people? Why does no one seem to see what I see? Is something wrong with me for thinking this deeply? This is for you. Esra, oh, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're here. This internet shit is like, I'm so thankful for it because I've really met some amazing spirits, you know, and Esra, you're one of them. Red, you're another. This is spiritual warfare on this internet, which is why if you see me around on your channels and you see me in your chat, I resonate with you for a reason, not just for entertainment. You know? Alki, you're another one, bro. The internet can be volatile, and that's where I have to. Red taught me this. Red Squid X. If you haven't subbed up to his channel, check him out. That is one of the most authentic spirits I've ever encountered in my life. I want my digital footprint to not be a shit stain. You feel me? Because it can be on here. There's time for entertainment. There's all, you know, we can all have a good time, but I don't need it to consistently be what I represent on here. And so this is the type of awareness that I want to pass on. to my loved ones and to those who this information makes sense to them at some point in time in their lives. Yeah, make sure all you wrenches share one another's channels. Mindful Exposures, Esra, Sarah, her channel is also a very special channel. Esra has a lot of schooling. She is an educated woman. She knows about the brain. She knows about wellness, and potentially I am going to invite her to do a stream and educate us on wellness, because this is really important to me. And I think that the state of the world that we are in right now needs these kinds of conversations, because there's a whole lot of other nonsense going on. Exactly. Sarah just is in the process of getting herself certified also as a massage therapist, and she busted her ass, and she will have it by the end of this year. She did that shit in 2 years. She said she would do it, and she did it. It's not easy. And I highly respect this lady, this woman. Okay, back at it. It's like walking into a party with a telescope strapped to your face. Everyone's laughing, drinking, talking about nothing in particular, and you're standing in the corner staring into the galaxies. No one else even knows you're there. You try to point them out. No one sees them. You lower the telescope. Smile, nod, pretend you're looking at the same things. Most people don't talk about this. They don't talk about what it's like to see patterns before they emerge. So the tribe that's here, this is for you. To feel things before they're spoken, to hear the tremble in someone's voice, even when their words are calm. You don't want to notice it. You just do. And the longer you live like this, the harder it becomes to explain. Because how do you describe the burden of seeing what others refuse to? Carl Jung once said, loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. And if that line lands in your bones, you already know what this is. You see the cracks in relationships before they split, the burnout before the collapse, the lie hiding behind the polite smile, the longing behind the success story. And when you speak about it, people say, you're too much. You think too deeply. You overanalyze everything. But the truth is, you're not overthinking. You're overfying. And you've been doing it for so long that silence feels safer than honesty. Because every time you speak the truth, you watch people flinch. I make people flinch all the time. Which is why I hang out with y'all. They weren't ready for it. They didn't ask for it. And so eventually you stop offering it. This is the part no one tells you about intelligence, especially emotional or spiritual intelligence. That it's not just about what you know, it's about what you feel. And that knowing, that feeling, that awareness, it separates you, not because you're better, because you're tuned to a different frequency. And that frequency comes with a cost. Statistically, individuals in the top 2% of intelligence distribution are 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from anxiety, depression, and social withdrawal. Not because they're unstable, but because they're constantly processing what others don't even register. Their nervous systems are flooded, their minds never rest, their hearts carry what others won't touch, but you wouldn't know it by looking at them. They bend in, they laugh at the times, they master the art of hiding in plain sight until one day they can't. Until the weight becomes too heavy to carry alone. And here's where the real question begins. Not what's wrong with me, but what am I supposed to do with this? Because you've tried softening your words, you've tried making yourself smaller, you've tried agreeing when your whole body wanted you to speak the truth. I'm not used to doing a lot of public speaking. Lubricate the larynx. And still the ache didn't go away. So maybe the ache isn't a problem. Maybe it's a signal. So maybe it's your soul telling you that you were never meant to stay in the shallow end. Carl Jung didn't study behavior to make people normal. He studied the soul to help people become whole. He knew that what makes a difference, our depth, our darkness, our vision, isn't malfunction. It's a calling. But before you can rise into that truth, you have to go down into the parts of yourself you've ignored, into the voices you've silenced, into the figures inside you that have shaped your relationships, your longings, your fears, and that holds the key to everything. You struggle to understand. The one Jung calls Thema and the Animus, and they've been waiting for you. What if the war isn't out there at all? What if the conflict is inside and wearing your face? And Carl Jung believed we carry a hidden figure within us, a secret companion formed not by choice but by nature. For men, it's the anima, Nema, the unconscious feminine. For women, it's the animus, the unconscious masculine. So again, Carl was all about these archetypes. But these aren't just gendered traits. They are archetypal energies, alive, complex, often buried so deep that we don't see them until they sabotage our lives. The first one. Okay, anima, give me a thumbs up. No, okay, anima. I gotta get it right. You felt that a sudden obsession with someone you barely know, that unexplained irritation with someone who reminds you of something you can't name. Oh, okay. You're that moment when you act completely out of character, driven by a voice you can't trace, that's them. The inner other Thema and a man might emerge as mood swings, unexplicable longing, or intense romantic projection. The animus in a woman might appear as a constant inner criticism, intellectual rigidity, or emotional detachment. And isn't that interesting, folks? We see a lot of that on these panels. And the more unaware you are of them, the more chaos they create. Jung didn't romanticize these forces, he warned of their power. He called them dangerous, especially when ignored. They possess a fatality, he wrote, that can on occasion produce tragic results. And if you're someone who sees deeply, who feels intensely, who notices what others miss, these inner figures become even more active because your outer clarity stirs the shadows within. And what you refuse to confront inside you will chase or fight outside. You'll fall in love with the fantasy of someone who mirrors your unlived self. You'll battle with partners not for what they've done, but for what they trigger in you. You'll swing between longing and withdrawal, between needing too much and trusting too little. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's closest collaborator, said it simply: the animus fosters loneliness in women, while the thrust men headlong into relationships and the confusion that accompanies them. This isn't theory. This is your history. Think back. How many times have you been overwhelmed by an emotional tide you couldn't explain? And how many arguments weren't really about the person in front of you, but about something older, deeper, and unnamed? This is why Jung's work matters now more than ever. Because we're not just battling society or systems or even relationships. We're battling ourselves until we recognize that the enemy is often a part of us, one we haven't yet listened to. We'll keep repeating the same painful loops. But here's the shift. Once you see the anima, damn it, or animus, not as a flaw, but as a guide, everything begins to change. You stop blaming you start integrating, you begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that you projected onto others. And it's a clean process, honesty, and messy emotional disorienting, because it asks you to sit with the mirror, not the one on the wall, but the one inside. Tell you what, we've been talking about this mirror a whole lot. The mirror that shows you who you were pretending not to be, the parts you disowned, the voices you muted, the chaos you feared, but as you sit, something else begins to happen. The projections fade, the panic softens, the craving for someone else to fix you dissolves, because now you're not waiting to be saved. You're building a bridge between who you've been and who you're becoming. And the person who walks across that bridge, they don't carry the same kind of burden because they've stopped running from it. They've turned around, faced it, listened, and in doing so, they've begun to lead. Some people carry thicker burden in silence, and others carry it in prophecy. Cassandra did both. The gods gave her the gift of foresight. She could see the future with razor clarity. Alki, Red, Ezra, Naga. But when she refuses the god Apollo, he cursed her not by taking away her sight, but by making sure no one would ever believe her. She would speak the truth. She would warn of catastrophe. She would cry out as the Trojans opened the gates to the wooden horse, and no one would listen. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't unstable. She was simply unseen. There's a reason her story still echoes across time, because Cassandra wasn't just a myth. She was a mirror. How many times have you known before it happened? How many times have you said, that doesn't feel right, only to be brushed aside? How many times have you been told, you're too much, you worry too much, you think too much, only to watch what you warned about unfold, right? You didn't want to be right. You just wanted to be heard. But the world is allergic to truth that arrives early. Most people don't want to see it until it's too late. And those who do, those who see first, feel first, speak first, are often cast unstable, as inconvenient, or as overreacting. In a room full of people still dreaming, Carl Jung knew this weight. He knew this weight well. A man who knows more than others becomes lonely, he wrote, because awareness doesn't just illuminate, it separates. It creates a distance between what you know and what you can say. And in that space, doubt creeps in. Maybe you start to wonder if you are really too much. Maybe you stop trusting your own clarity, and maybe you begin to maybe you begin to shrink, not because you've lost your vision, but because you've learned the truth. And what the truth costs. And in a world obsessed with ease, truth becomes expensive. But here's the danger. The more often you're ignored, the more tempting it becomes to stop speaking, to silence yourself before someone else does. You learn to read the room before you read your own soul. You start censoring what you see just to stay close to people who only love your quiet version. This is the quiet death of a seer, not because their visions fade, but because they stop offering. Because the silence is less painful than being dismissed. But that silence comes at a cost. There's a moment, a threshold, where you feel it. That if you hide your truth one more time, you might never find your way back to it. But the more you dilute yourself for others, the more you disappear, that person they like isn't even you, and that where the fork appears, speak and risk exile, or stay silent and lose yourself. It's a brutal choice, but it's not new, because there was another story, another soul who faced the exact decision. Not a prophet this time, a king, a wise one. And what he chose says everything about what it means to see clearly in a world that does not. Let me tell you about him. In this story, you might recognize your own chapter. You might recognize yourself. The wise king and the poisoned well. There once was a king known not for his armies, but for his clarity. He ruled a city where reason prevailed. Justice was real. People felt seen. He listened, and more than he spoke. He wasn't perfect, but he was wise, and his wisdom held the kingdom together until one night, while the city slept, a witch came quietly and poured a potion into the town's well, their only well. By dawn, everyone had drunk from it, everyone except the king. And by midday, the kingdom had gone mad. They spoke in riddle. They accused each other of crimes never committed. They forgot what day it was. They feared things that didn't exist. They praised things that had no meaning. And yet to each other, they all seemed fine. It was the king who now seemed strange, distant, different. And when he tried to speak reason, when he warned of what was happening, they didn't listen. They looked at him with suspicion. They whispered behind closed doors. They called him unwell. But by nightfall, they were ready to remove him, not because he failed, but because he'd stayed the same. So the king stood alone. So the king stood alone in his chamber, holding a goblet of water drawn from the same well, and he faced a choice: drink and be accepted, or refuse and be exiled. And that night he drank. The next morning the city rejoiced. Our king is one of us again, they said. He understands, but he didn't. He just gave up to be understood. And so the madness continued. Polite structures celebrated. This story isn't about kings and wells, it's about now. It's been about these last 5 years. It's about you, because if you've ever hidden your insight just to be accepted, if you've ever laughed at the wrong jokes just to avoid standing out, if you've ever nodded along with everything, if you've nodded along when everything in you screamed, then you've tasted from the well. And maybe you didn't even realize it. Maybe you've been sipping for years slowly, letting go of the parts of you that saw too much, felt too deeply, spoke too early. Maybe you've just adjusted your truth so well that it now fits comfortably into the conversation that used to feel unbearable. But underneath the comfort is grief, the kind of grief that only comes from abandoning the truth. Carl Jung warned about this. He said the greatest danger isn't in being wrong, it's in losing yourself inside the collective, in trading your clarity for applause, in giving up your mind so you don't lose your tribe. He knew that individuation, the becoming of your full self, requires solitude. It demands that you step out of the current, even when it carries everyone you love. It asks you to face the ache of being different, the silence of walking alone, the fear of never being understood. But he also left us something else, a thread of hope. He wrote, no matter how isolated you are, if you do not work truthfully and consciously, unknown friends will come and seek you. Unknown friends, not saviors, not crowds, just people, real ones, who don't flinch at your truth, who don't ask you to shrink, who don't confuse your clarity for coldness or your depth for drama. But you won't find them if you keep drinking. You won't find them if you keep pretending. You won't find them by standing in your truth, even when it costs you the room. You find them by staying clear. While the world celebrates confusion, you find them by choosing to speak, not because it's safe, but because it's real. And maybe you're not there yet. Maybe you're still holding the goblet, still weighing the cost. That's okay. But know this. Every time you choose to see and stay silent, a part of you goes quiet too. And every time you speak, even your voice shakes. Even if no one listens, you keep something alive, something rare, something sacred. The part of you that was born not to conform, but to wake the sleeping. The quiet cost of clarity. Not all burdens are loud. Some sit silently on your chest in the middle of a conversation, smiling while you feel the weight of everything left unsaid. Some don't scream, they hum quietly, just beneath the noise of daily life. And that's the strange thing about being the one who sees too much. It's not always the seeing that's painful. It is the pretending not to. You've likely done it without realizing. You're at a dinner, someone says something off, the energy shifts, you feel the tension before anyone else does. You catch the glance, the micro expression, the subtle withdrawal. You know something just happened, but no one else seems to notice. So you stay quiet. You don't want that person again. You don't want to be that person again. You know how it ends. They tell you you're overreacting. They say you're reading too much into it. You start to doubt yourself, not because you're wrong, but because you're tired. Tired of being the only one who names the invisible. And so you edit, you withhold, you smile more. You simplify your thoughts so they can land without resistance. You become fluent in small talk, even if it empties you, Hold back not because you lack words, but because you've learned what truth costs. But it costs in a room that doesn't want it. Psychologists call it masking. Others call it, that word is. Jung might have called it soul loss. Whatever you name in the results is the same. You begin to disappear and no one notices because the version of you they saw still functions, still shows up, still says all the right things, but the real you, the full you, is miles beneath the surface, unspoken, undervalued, unreachable. This is the quiet cost of clarity, not the suffering that comes from the misunderstanding, but the erosion that happens from constantly understanding everyone else and never being understood in return. And eventually it starts to feel normal that you're the one who adjusts, that you're the one who carries the emotional labor, that you're the one who absorbs the discomfort so the room can stay light. But here's the dangerous part. You get good at it. So good, in fact, that even you forget how much you've buried until one day it catches up. It might be in the form of a burnout or a sudden wave of grief that makes no sense, or the realization that you're surrounded yourself with people who like you more for your silence than your truth. And that's when the reckoning begins, the real work of individuation, as Jung called it. It isn't just about discovering who you are, it's about unlearning who you became to survive. It's not just about waking up, it's about coming back to the parts of you that once spoke freely, back to the insights you used to share before they were dismissed, back to the little intuitions you used to follow before the world taught you to mistrust them. But that return isn't easy because the moment you start reclaiming your clarity, you begin losing your camouflage. You become visible again, not as the agreeable version, but as the real one. And that's where the loneliness spikes again, because some of the people closest to you may have never met the version of you that's now resurfacing. And some of them won't want to. But don't let that stop you, because the life you want, the connections you crave, the freedom you deserve, they only live on the other side of pretending. And there's something else that happens when you stop hiding. The weight doesn't go away, but it starts to shift. It's no longer a secret. It's no longer shame. It becomes something useful, something holy. The burden begins to glow. When the burden becomes a beacon, it happens so slowly you barely notice. One day you're carrying the weight of the insight like a curse. The next you're offering it like a lantern. Not because the world suddenly got easier, because you did. Because you stopped treating your perception like a problem, because you stopped apologizing for your depth, because you realized that your sensitivity wasn't a flaw, it was a compass. That your inner noise wasn't chaos, it was guidance. That the very things you tried to suppress were the exact things someone else was praying to find. Jung called this individuation the integration of the whole self, not the self you curated, not the self you compromised into accessibility. The real self, the full self, the sacred contradiction of soul and shadow logic, and feeling chaos and clarity held together by courage. And the courage doesn't look like dominance, it looks like stillness. It looks like choosing to speak even when your voice trembles. It looks like staying rooted when others ask you to bend. It's like telling the truth, not to be right, but to be real. And something happens when you do. People begin to appear, not crowds, not noise, but kindred spirits. Quiet ones, observant ones. People who see you, not just the mask, but the light behind your eyes. People who've walked through their own version of the fire and recognized the burn marks on yours. They won't need you to explain. They already know. And for the first time in a long time, you'll feel it. That click, that resonance, that quiet yes, the sense that you don't have to dilute anything to belong, that your voice isn't too much, that your vision isn't too strange, that your burden isn't yours alone anymore, because now it's a bridge, a beacon, something that doesn't just carry you forward, but that calls others in. And maybe that's why you carried it for so long. Not because you weren't meant to suffer, but because you were meant to lead. Not with the answers, but with the presence. Not with the perfection, but with the depth. The world doesn't need more people who fit in. And it needs people who can see, who can feel, who can hold the complexity and still move with love. It needs you. So if this found you at the right time, let it be a sign. It was never just a burden. It was never just weight. It was always the beginning of your light. You are the Neo. The system is your enemy, which is the inner aspects of you and me, myself, and I. People be sipping soul poison all the time. For real. Suppressing yourself is like turning charcoal into a diamond. Mm-hmm. Convergence. What's good? Hey, 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 chica loca. How are you? Good to see you, Miss Cynthia. All right, I've almost been talking for 2 whole hours. It's a lot of talking. Thank you, everybody who stayed around, came in and out, listened to what I had to say, and hopefully you got something out of this. It's my gift to you, the wisdom I've attained and that I'm still going through day by day. I've also learned to change my habits, my bad habits from the past, what I take in and listen to before I go to bed. I don't reach for my phone in the morning. I try to read some insightful information from my mind. I read. I'm not listening. I read before I go to sleep. And when I get up in the morning, I do some journaling and I do some stretching and some exercise. I give myself 2 hours to myself and 2 hours in preparation for my workday. I'm trying to avoid being lazy because I've been doing a lot of lazy behavior and I need to get myself out of that pattern. So doing these streams is also helpful for me to do more research and to do a digital journaling and to also use artistic values in the presentation. I enjoy it a lot. It's a lot of fun. Oops. Thank you. Red, you've helped me. You've helped to mold the strength that I'm invoking within myself on this digital realm, and I appreciate you very, very much. I hope that there will be times when I have a panel on the other channel and it may seem like absolute chaos and bullshit, but that's also the fun aspect of being a human being, and it is a good distraction because there's a lot going on in this world. So it is the yin and the yang. and I'm aware of it and what I'm doing. And I've also learned that I don't have to allow people to participate on my channel. I can block them and pay them no mind, because that's what a narcissistic reading was all about, because there's so many narcissistic personalities that float around in this digital realm like demons, and I don't need to pay any mind to them. I'm going to rebuke all of them. They don't exist, right? They don't exist. You are what you eat. Hear, see, feel, think, and do. Examine your intake on all levels and adjust it while you can. Amen to that. This last year, I completely have changed my diet, and I never would think in a million years that I would get used to drinking celery juice every day. But I recognize that I am an electrical being, and those plants, the photosynthesis within those plants, help to charge the electricity in my body. So I have to balance my body with my water, how I treat my water, and the plants within myself, along with, you know, the other things. I'm just very aware of what I've been putting into my body. Yes, you have to think about I guess I need to be a little bit careful, and I will talk more about this on another stream. That's what I would like to invite Mindful Exposures on, because we've been doing some research about this together, and talk about that, the importance of how the temple works. And, you know, just like they're showing these AI robots, the components of that robot, if the circuitry is not aligning, it's going to malfunction, which is why you see some of these leaders straight malfunctioning. You know, the leader of the free world advertises for McDonald's, for God's sake. Anyways, it was really great hanging out with all of you guys. I'll see you around. Take care. Be blessed and stay safe. See you around.